Quantum leaders, the innovator. Applying the principle of quantum consciousness, oscillation between strong and weak forces. The innovator's natural style is idea-centric, exploratory, and unbound by convention. They thrive in open possibility, bouncing between curiosity, observation, and rapid ideation. But true quantum creativity doesn't come from constant expansion. It arises through oscillation between strong force, focused creation, decisive expression, and weak force, receptivity, wonder, nonlinear synthesis. The innovator becomes most powerful not when they invent endlessly, but when they rhythmically alternate between expression and absorption, between pushing ideas into form and letting ideas arrive through field attunement. With a motivation direction of towards, the innovator is magnetized by what's possible. The strong force shows up in their ambition to pursue, build, and articulate new visions. But if always charging forward, they risk superficial innovation, skimming possibility without fully landing it. The weak force balances them, curiosity without urgency, space without pressure. In that soft interval, radical ideas condense. The innovator's genius flourishes when they oscillate between bold pursuit and creative listening. Their attention focus on others allows them to create for the world, not just from self. The strong force here is their desire to serve, improve, inspire. Yet too much external orientation can dilute originality, trying to please, predict, or perform. The weak force calls them inward, into silent incubation, solitude, and sacred irrelevance. When innovators oscillate between feedback and detachment, they create not just for others, but from the field itself, bringing forward what the collective didn't yet know it needed. With an external frame of reference, innovators naturally seek input, inspiration, and collaboration. The strong force uses this to iterate and evolve. But when over-relied upon, it becomes overfitting, losing the raw edge of their insight. The weak force invites inner sourcing, trusting flashes, dreams, and daydreams that bypass rational critique. The oscillation between crowdsourced refinement and intuitive channeling transforms them into oracles of relevance. Innovative not because they're loud, but because they're attuned. Their options-based operational style gives them freedom to explore paths unconventionally. The strong force expresses as mental agility and nonlinear construction. But too much motion scatters momentum. The weak force is focus, not as rigidity, but as temporary stillness, committing to one thread long enough to find its shape. When innovators oscillate between divergent expansion and quiet convergence, they stop chasing novelty and start shaping brilliance. The general viewpoint allows them to move through concepts rather than tasks. The strong force here is pattern vision, abstraction, big picture fluency. But the weak force is depth, being with one pattern long enough to feel its rhythm, to sit in the fog before the insight crystallizes. Oscillation here means zooming out to map and zooming in to embody. Their ideas become not only broad, but deep, felt, and lasting. With a proximity work preference, innovators draw vitality from creative exchange. The strong force thrives in team ideation, energy loops, brainstorming, yet the weak force is solitude, the sacred void where no one else's thoughts interfere. When innovators oscillate between high-frequency collaboration and deep private incubation, they recover their own signal. Their field becomes clearer, sharper, and more original. Their emotional engagement is associated. They feel ideas as lived experiences. The strong force is passion, immersion, and emotional ignition. But burnout can follow without the weak force: detachment, levity, perspective. Innovators evolve when they oscillate between feeling their way into creation and stepping back to observe without over-identifying. The result is inspired clarity, emotionally resonant yet anchored. As mismatchers, they challenge norms instinctively. The strong force is reinvention. What if we flip this? But constant opposition becomes chaos. The weak force is honoring what already works, finding rhythm within existing form. When they oscillate between disruption and recognition, they invent with the system, not just against it. The innovator becomes evolutionary, not just revolutionary. Their in-time orientation allows them to create in flow, immersed, spontaneous, agile. The strong force here is presence-fueled genius. But the weak force is perspective, stepping out of time to reevaluate, resequence, or pause. Oscillation between immersion and elevation helps them align creativity not just with impulse, but with impact. And with a primary drive of activity, innovators thrive in motion, play, and output. The strong force here is doing, sketching, building, launching, but the weak force is being, daydreaming, wandering, not doing. In these non-productive moments, the next level of insight lands. When innovators oscillate between effort and openness, execution and emptiness, they create work that's not just clever, but catalytic. In this rhythm of strong and weak, assertion and receptivity, innovation becomes more than creative churn. It becomes evolutionary intelligence. The innovator ceases to be the scattered genius or exhausted visionary. They become a conscious antenna, transmitting what's next, not by force, but by flow. Quantum leaders, the innovator. Dynamic equilibrium as nature's core design. The innovator's natural style, curious, exploratory, and idea-driven, naturally resists fixity. Yet the principle of dynamic equilibrium reveals a deeper truth. Even creativity needs rhythm. Innovation is not endless motion. It is oscillation between expansion and refinement. The innovator matures when they discover that balance isn't found in muting their imagination. It's found in harnessing its pulse. Dynamic equilibrium means not choosing between spontaneity and structure, but weaving them together to create sustainable originality. With a motivation direction of towards, the innovator is fueled by possibility. The polarity here is spark versus sustainability. Too much pursuit creates mental overload. Too much pause, and ideas fade. Their genius lies in moving toward potential with calibrated pacing, driving creative motion without abandoning the field before it blooms. When they learn to let ideas stretch and settle, their visions gain legs, not just wings. Their attention focus on others makes them sensitive to usefulness and impact. The equilibrium tension appears as inspiration versus application. If they lean too far into abstract service, they risk disconnection from true need. If they lean too much into pleasing others, they dilute originality. Their sweet spot is innovation that feels authentic and relevant. Listening deeply to others, without outsourcing direction, turns their concepts into catalysts. With an external frame of reference, the innovator values feedback loops and shared energy, but equilibrium asks them to pair this with inner knowing. Feedback can refine, but not define, their process. When they oscillate between external refinement and internal clarity, they stay porous to insight while retaining creative sovereignty. Their work becomes both responsive and resilient. Their options-based operational style gives them range and flexibility, but dynamic equilibrium arises when choice is tempered by conscious focus. Not every idea needs pursuit. Not every path deserves exploration. When they design creative constraints, not as walls, but as invitations, their mind becomes a chamber of innovation rather than a cloud of possibility. Clarity doesn't limit them. It liberates direction. Their general viewpoint supports pattern recognition and thematic design. But when generality isn't balanced with grounding, creativity can become vaporous. Equilibrium is found when innovators learn to shape frameworks into usable models, holding the abstract and the applied in mutual respect. They move from idea starters to systems thinkers. With a proximity work preference, they thrive in stimulating environments. The polarity is interaction versus incubation. Too much group exchange fragments their energy. Too much solitude leads to echo chambers. Innovators who build dynamic rhythms, burst collaboration followed by solo reflection, find balance in both resonance and renewal. Their ideas evolve faster and land deeper. Their emotional engagement is associated. They are fully immersed in their creative process. But immersion can become entanglement. Equilibrium arises when they step back just enough to gain perspective, viewing the idea, not becoming the idea. This allows them to iterate without identity collapse. They become the steward of creation, not its hostage. As mismatchers, they challenge norms instinctively. The equilibrium tension is disruption versus integration. Constant reinvention becomes unsustainable if nothing stabilizes. Yet, total integration flattens innovation. Innovators become change artists when they disrupt gently, inserting novelty into existing forms, rather than breaking everything to start anew. With an in-time orientation, they are present-focused and reactive. But dynamic equilibrium expands their temporal lens. When they learn to pause before reacting, or to project where an idea wants to go long-term, they shift from responsive creativity to visionary continuity. Their timing becomes not just intuitive, but strategic. And with a primary drive of activity, the innovator is energized by doing, building, creating. But action needs recovery. Motion needs pause. Equilibrium asks, when is the work asking for rest? When they learn to follow the rhythm of output and integration, action and absorption, their creative cycles become regenerative, not extractive. In this space, the innovator stops chasing novelty and begins designing evolution. Their creativity becomes less erratic and more orchestral, rising, pausing, building, resting. They don't lose their spontaneity. They refine it into conscious flow. The innovator becomes not just a source of ideas, but a rhythm keeper for what the future wants to become. Quantum leaders, the innovator, observer effect, and the collapse of possibility. The innovator's natural style, fluid, imaginative, and oriented toward emergence, often appears boundless. But under the quantum principle of the observer effect, they are reminded. The act of noticing shapes reality. What the innovator pays attention to, what they believe about their ideas, their audience, or their timing, begins to collapse potential into form. The creative process is not a neutral space. It is a field that responds to focus. The innovator's awareness becomes a filter, and eventually a sculptor, of which ideas take shape and which remain formless. With a motivation direction of towards, the innovator seeks what's next. But what they expect to find dramatically impacts what emerges. If they expect brilliance, brilliance starts to organize. If they expect resistance, they may unconsciously create friction where none existed. The observer effect teaches the innovator to ask, what am I assuming about this idea before it begins? That assumption is already shaping its outcome. Their attention focus on others tunes them into audience response, usefulness, and impact. But here lies a paradox. The more they expect others to misunderstand or resist, the more that energy infuses their work. Subtle doubt becomes coded into delivery. Yet when they view others as capable of receiving what they offer, curious, ready, and attuned, their creations arrive differently. The innovator becomes not just a creator, but a permission giver, signaling to the field that newness can be welcomed, not feared. With an external frame of reference, the innovator looks outward for reflection and validation. But the observer effect demands discernment. Are they seeking proof too soon? Do they observe their half-formed idea as not good enough, thus freezing it in incompletion? When they begin observing their own creativity with compassion and curiosity, not critique, they allow it to unfold instead of collapse prematurely. Their gaze becomes a greenhouse, not a microscope. Their options-based operational style keeps them dancing among ideas. But the way they observe these options matters. If they see them as distractions, they fragment. If they see them as playful pathways, they become integrated. The innovator becomes more effective when they observe possibility not as overwhelming, but as modular, each idea a facet of a larger emergence. What they choose to focus on will grow stronger. What they judge as noise will fade, even if it was once a seed of brilliance. Their general viewpoint allows them to track concepts and patterns, but it also risks collapsing ideas too abstractly. If they observe their ideas only from a distance, never committing, never entering, they may unintentionally keep them conceptual. The observer effect empowers them to choose when to hold an idea lightly and when to gaze with full presence, inviting it to take form. With a proximity work preference, innovators thrive on relational energy. But group dynamics are also shaped by observation. If they expect friction or doubt their contribution, they may subtly create those conditions. Yet when they observe the team as a supportive field, eager to co-create, the team rises to match that frequency. The innovator's belief about relational flow shapes the actual collaboration. Their emotional engagement is associated. They feel their way into ideas. But how they interpret those feelings becomes critical. If they observe excitement as inspiration, it grows. But if they observe discomfort as threat, the idea may collapse prematurely. Not all emotional charge is a red flag. Some is expansion. The innovator gains power when they track emotional signals without assuming meaning too early. Let the wave move before naming it. As a mismatcher, they instinctively notice what's off. But constant mismatch can reinforce separation. The observer effect offers a challenge. What happens when they observe what is working, what is emerging, what almost fits? This shift doesn't silence innovation. It opens deeper nuance. They don't lose their edge. They refine it to see possibilities that didn't exist when only observing what's broken. Their in-time orientation keeps them present and reactive. But if they only observe the now, they may miss emergent timing. An idea may feel too early or not ready, but is that true or a projection? When they observe time as a fluid structure, not fixed, they begin collapsing futures more consciously. They don't just create in time, they create with time. And with a primary drive of activity, the innovator is always doing, expressing, building. But under the observer effect, activity is never neutral. How they feel while creating, their assumptions, judgments, or excitement, gets embedded into the output. Their ideas carry the trace of their gaze. When they become aware of how they are observing themselves in motion, they gain access to higher coherence in their work. In this frame, the innovator is no longer just generating ideas. They are sculpting reality, subtly, continually, by what they attend to, believe, and emotionally invest in. Their presence is formative. Their gaze is an invitation or a closure. When they honor this, they stop trying to force innovation into the world. They begin witnessing it into existence. They observe possibility with care, focus, and curiosity, and that observation becomes the very act of creation.